Wanted to also read a quote with you from someone who's actually a terrorism expert. Some of you may be familiar with him, Walter Laqueur. When he said the statement, it was around 2002, after September 11th. He was the co-chair of the International Research Council at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And he was reflecting a little bit on terrorism in terms of also soft power and cultural diplomacy. And he said the following: "Far from being on the verge of a new order, the world has entered a period of great disorder. In facing these new dangers, a re-examination of old priorities is needed. Cultural diplomacy, in the widest sense, has increased in importance, whereas traditional diplomacy and military power are of limited use in coping with most of these dangers." And it's, I think, a fairly profound statement in the sense as we try to grapple with questions such as global terrorism. How can one really respond? Is there a chance that through culture? And when we say cultural diplomacy, we should clarify also what we mean there. I think cultural diplomacy in the 20th century, we're all familiar with the British Council, Alliance Française, Goethe Institute, America House. It tended to be a cultural diplomacy about persuasion, in some cases even propaganda during the Cold War. It was really about winning the hearts and minds of foreign audiences. So as we discuss cultural diplomacy this evening, I don't think we need to be limited, but I would call this classical definition of cultural diplomacy. And I would urge us to think also in terms of other opportunities. We had some discussions earlier today talking about also academic exchange, the idea of facilitating dialogue, facilitating understanding and trust between nations using culture. So in that sense, when we speak about cultural diplomacy, I would encourage us to really have a wide sense there in the sense, how can we help educate, enhance, and sustain relationships as opposed to just promoting one country's good or the other. So by way of introduction, I just wanted to share those reflections with you. And now I would like to begin immediately with the discussion. We're already running slightly behind schedule. I want to try to keep this as interactive as we can. So I would urge our panelists to give also concise, brief answers or comments to allow for ample discussion amongst the panel, to be followed by also questions from the audience. My first question, I think I will direct on Mrs. Shripkes. But actually, before I do that, I should also introduce briefly the panelists. We have some new guests here who have not yet been introduced. So Dr. Busek, we've actually already had the chance to hear from earlier today. As you know, former Vice Chancellor of Austria, former Minister of Science and Research, former Minister of Education and Cultural Affairs. So again, someone who has had some good experience also with the topic of cultural diplomacy. Professor Susan George just joined us, coming all the way from Georgetown University. I'm sorry, that's Paris. It wasn't as far as I thought. That's true. Exactly. And I think they're really someone who has had the chance to reflect on this in terms of the theory and also the practice, joining us from Paris, involved also in terms of civil society, also in terms of the role that civil society can have in terms of culture and also diplomacy. We have also Professor Dr. Krakun is joining us also, who's the former Minister of Economic Relations and Development from Slovenia, also the former Foreign Minister, former Deputy Prime Minister, representing in many ways Southeastern Europe. Professor Dr. Tsuveli also joining us. Former Albanian Minister of the Environment, Forests and Water, Agriculture and Food. And we already discussed earlier before this session a few questions that I would like to go into detail, in particular academic exchange and scientific exchange in terms of cultural diplomacy. Professor Dr. Inga Kau, we've already had the chance to meet actually earlier this morning, as you know, professor here in Berlin, also former director of the UNDP's Office of Development Studies. Ms. Shripkes, we've also had the chance to meet, member of the European Parliament, former Minister of Culture and Religious Affairs of Luxembourg, and then Niam Bretnak, former Minister of Education in Ireland. So it's a full panel with a lot of expertise from different regions and also different fields. So now, my first question I would like to direct at Ms. Shripkes, and then also would ask anyone who would like to comment on it. Individual identity in the global economy. If policymakers claim that the answer to stabilizing the global economy is deeper integration, in order to advance national economies, will we see a backlash from the national populations out of fear of an attack on their national identity? What role do you see cultural diplomacy playing in achieving a more integrated global economy? And how could cultural diplomacy prevent such a backlash from occurring? Ms. Shripkes? And if we have any other wireless mics, maybe... we have to share. Okay, please.
We should start through education. I think economy is strongly linked to education. But we should start as well to acceptance. Tolerance is no more sufficient. People must accept immigrants, immigration, accept different cultures, and to be able to do it in a peaceful way, they have to be trained. They have to learn, first of all, what is their own culture. And there, I think, in Europe, there is a lack of knowing and of having strong roots in their own culture. People don't know more. They are not aware what were the Christian values and what were the basics that enabled us to create the European Union, forgiving those who attacked other countries. No more talking about losers and winners. And all this was a basics, and this is no more present. Of course, younger generations have a different view of it, because they don't want to talk about the past. They want to look to the future. And so I think economy can help very much. And I quote the situation of my country, Luxembourg, in the midst of Germany, the Saarland, and French Lothringen. That was the country of coal and steel. There were coal mines all over the borders. The people knew what they were talking about when there was a problem with coal mines. So they had a deep understanding through the economy. The economy has created some link over the borders. And perhaps the development of region is more important than the staying to the nation state.
Thank you. I'm actually going to turn it to Dr. George now, but before I do so, our videographer has made a small request. If we could actually, the two of you could slide slightly closer to the stage, just to make sure that we have also a good shot from you. Is that, yeah? And then maybe if you could just give us the signal. We're going to be taking video documentation of the entire 4 days to try also to document the excellent discussions that we have. All right, I think we're getting the good cue from the camera. Dr. George, please, if you could also respond.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you, Mark Donfried, and the ICD for asking me to come. I can tell it's going to be a fascinating few days here. And since the discussion, I was going to say something else, but since the discussion so far has been almost entirely about Eastern and Western Europe, I would like to say that it is relevant to your question, is there going to be a backlash, or will there be a reaction to a backlash against national values? And I was born in the United States, but I'm a French woman. I've lived in France for over 50 years. I am a fervent European, and I was extremely active in the campaign for the no against the Constitution. Now, this has been very much misinterpreted outside of France because the media were not on our side, either in France or in Europe. But allow me to tell you that this debate about the Constitution was the biggest debate we had had in France since 1968, May of 1968. There were about 1,000 collectives that sprang up all over the country, which included ecologists, trade unionists, dissidents from the parties like the Greens and the Socialists, who had come out officially, the leadership officially for the yes, people from the whole range of civil society, and some people who had never been active in anything before. And these collectives organized debates all over the country. I have not seen anything so well attended. I was campaigning, and I was, for example, in a village of 800 people where 150 people came. In Toulouse, we filled up the sports arena, and there were another 5,000 people waiting outside. I have seen husbands and wives fighting against, you're for the yes, I'm for the no, etc. I mean, it was a huge, huge debate, and it was a very democratic one. And when you see that there were 70% of the people who participated, whereas previously the vote participation in European elections was 46%, you can tell that people were really interested. And the no was a working class vote. If you compare Neuilly, where Nicolas Sarkozy was mayor, very rich community, 85% for the yes. You take a working class suburb near Rouen, 85% for the no. The only socioeconomic group that came out solidly for the yes was upper management and that kind of upper middle class background. So, frankly, I'm sorry, but it wasn't the Polish plumber. That is Bolkestein, who said that on the radio. I heard him say it, and then it was picked up by but it wasn't that, and it wasn't Islam either. That discussion was on the right, and our worst enemies say that, about 18% of the no vote did come from Turkish sentiment or whatever, but it wasn't that. It was about our values. It was about our culture. It was about liberté, égalité, fraternité, and laïcité, because there was also a threat to laïcité, which is not well translated by secularism, but I won't go into that. We felt that on the no side that this was the most neoliberal document that had ever been presented to any people anywhere. It was written by an unelected convention. It signed us up to increase our military spending and to be members of NATO, which we now are. The charter, I recognize, was better for some countries, but for us it was a drop in the level of our rights. And I think what the no was trying to do was to send a message. We were trying to say we want Europe, but we don't want this Europe. We don't want a constitution where free and undistorted competition is mentioned 25 times, where the market comes into the document 78 times, and there's nothing about unemployment, nothing about, or very little about social rights, and it just signs us up for a future we're not interested in. I won't comment on the Dutch, it was different, but then came the Irish one, so 3 peoples in Europe have said no, but we voted wrong. It reminds me of Bertolt Brecht, who said the government is dissatisfied with the people, perhaps they should dissolve this people and elect a new one. That was in 1953, and I think Dr. Eppelman may be sensitive to this. So, we have felt that we are victims of an anti-democratic Europe, and Günther Verheugen really embodied this when he said after the French and the Dutch votes to his colleagues, we must not give in to blackmail. So much for popular sovereignty. So much for we the people. Now, I wrote a book called We the Peoples of Europe because I deeply believe that we have many things in common, but one of those things is a real love for the Enlightenment values, the Aufklärung. To us, this remains important. The values of the revolution remain important. And we felt these were being trampled upon. And therefore, we voted no by 54%. So I think that we're not on the same planet sometimes when I hear, I know where this comes from. I've heard this from many different nationalities saying that the no vote was a refusal of Europe. And part of it was. Part of it, indeed, 17, 18% came from the far right and from pure Eurosceptics. But the rest was not. So what we were hoping was that we would have a Europe which would really recognize its values, which would not say the market is everything, that competition is everything, and that we could be a kind of, this may be very idealistic, but that we could be a kind of beacon to the rest of the world to say, look, it's possible to give everyone an education, everyone health care, child care for everyone, a high standard of living. This is possible, and we can help you do it. But first we have to show that we can do it ourselves, including for our friends from the East, from Eastern Europe. So that was the point of that vote for me, and now I am terribly disappointed in the way Europe is going, but I will continue to struggle to the best of my ability.
I think you've inspired a few responses. I think first Ms. Shipkes, and then Ms. Biednack.
Well, let's come to the reality of the convention. The convention was not an assembly of non-elected people. It was a second stage of elected people. They were, yeah. But democracy is delegating the power of the people to those they elect. And so they were quietly supposed to speak on the name of their nation. And when you say it was not the Polish plumber, I don't believe you. It still is the Polish plumber. And it was a French debate. If you looked at the debate, who was debating with whom? Laurent Fabius, who had been my colleague as president of the Assembly, and who could have done much more for promoting European policy in the French Assemblée Nationale, who could have taken the initiative of creating a commission for European affairs. He has not done it. And if you look at the stage of information en France profonde, could you tell me in how many areas you can catch Euronews? You only have French information, you have French newspaper. So this being turned to oneself is a big handicap for promoting European ideas. And we as Luxembourgers, we are between French and Germans. And we know a lot of the different kind. They are working both. So I think this is the real question. France should stay what it is. And we all have a lot to learn of the French culture. But France should also turn to the outside. And yes, you are at a higher level of education, but look how many French people speak foreign languages. It's quite amazing, and it's quite a lot to do for mutual understanding.
I'll try to go in order, but I think first, Dr. George, maybe if you'd like to respond, and then...
I think this is a discussion we shall have to have in private, because that otherwise it can go on all night and no one else will get a chance to speak. So I simply disagree with everything except the very last point.
Well, I was one of the people who sat in an audience when Susan George came to Dublin to tell us in Dublin we had done the wrong thing. But I think the Irish experience is interesting because after the first no, there was a year-long campaign which involved itself in a lot of market research. And I would recommend to you that you actually have a look at that, because we are at the stage, and I had mentioned it this morning, in a democracy when people go out in the way they do it, and we are very loath in Ireland to say to other countries, you go and try a constitutional referendum like we do and see, will you get the results you did get? That is not our business. Countries do rule their countries in their own way, and we stayed away very much from that, and we looked at ourselves. And that research, the most startling finding was the lack of information on the EU and on its institutions. And that actually, I think we can, all of us Europeans, you see, I would call myself an absolute European, and that would distinguish me in your argument. People would have no doubt at all. But I had gone out to argue the cause for the Lisbon Treaty. But we would say, and it is our fault, we are not giving the message back to our own people. And we had Commissioner Wallström in, and she is a very attractive speaker, and she was very informative. But the trouble was, in most of these things, the people on her side turned up. It was very, very difficult to attract the people who were actually out there in this large don't know category. So the second time round, actually, they took the campaign nearly out of the hands of the politicians and the political parties, and they gave it to civic society. And they gave it to the musicians, and they gave it to the writers, and they gave it to the university people, and they gave it to the youth. And we actually got 64% of a yes the second time round. No, but I have to say to you that you've got to believe the research we did. And the research we did showed, I mean, there is a bit of it's the Turkish plumber in Ireland, and most people don't even know where Turkey is. But, you know, taking all that aside, the huge gap was the lack of information of the EU institutes. And that's why people like me are prepared to travel and accept your invitations to come here. Because not only, I hope, do you get something out of it, but actually it keeps me mainstream as well. So there is a challenge to any of us who are conducting any kind of international diplomatic think tanks to make sure we don't just talk to ourselves, because we believe in the project. Or we have been taken to the edge of our belief, we have been challenged, and actually a good debate makes people like me articulate what I feel. But the huge challenge is that those of us who are now involved in cultural diplomacy, that we actually realise talking to ourselves isn't the aim of this, but it's actually making sure that we take the message out to people who, when they were polled in Ireland, and I don't think the Irish are very much different from the others, in the privacy of that, were able to say, we didn't really know what it was about. And that was 8 years after She's Gardaí started. So there's a big onus on us on the communications, and that actually is what we call soft diplomacy. And I think that is a huge challenge, whichever side we are on. Thank you.
Our experience was that as soon as people actually read the document, which thousands, if not millions, did, they turned against it right away. Once they were informed, they said no.
Okay, Professor Dr. Cowell, I think it's...
So, it is not long ago that I returned after 30 years abroad to Germany. And I found it very hard. Let me first tell you what I did during these 30 years. I studied in India. I lived in villages. I did my field work in Indian coal mines, not in Luxembourg coal mines. Then I lived in New York, and I became a real New Yorker. I loved it. I served for the UN in Laos. These were the best years of my time, of my life, because you cannot imagine how nice massages by monks in Buddhist monasteries can be. I lived in Afghanistan. I found out what war means, but I also got to know the hospitality of the Afghan people. And I went back to New York. I went to Africa. And I can tell you, from Africa, I learned family values, how you deal with your grandmother and your kids and all of this. In Afghanistan and India, I got a new understanding of democracy, because we spent nights and nights sitting there discussing, chatting away all the problems that were around, returning to issues that were not resolved, just talking, not just going to the ballot box and voting for something or the other. So when I returned in New York, you can imagine, what I learned, but I also learned a sort of American way of life. When you face a problem, you get at it, And in Germany, what hit me most, shortly after I returned, I went to Bonn, and I heard there, while looking at the Rhine in a hotel, sitting at the veranda there, they played a song which said, basically, why on earth must it be so nice on the Rhine? And that's a typical German attitude. We even query the niceties of life. Now, I found it very hard to return for the following reason. I don't feel anymore that necessarily we have something to export. When I hear soft diplomacy, I would hope that we also learn to listen. and see that other countries do things quite differently, but that they are very, very good things, that one can pick up from there. So being back here, I found that for many Germans it's very hard to look beyond Germany. If we look beyond Germany, we look to Brussels. Yeah. And there life often ends. So I wish we were not doing the navel gazing, which started also here. The world is more than Europe, and sure we can discuss the conflicts between Luxembourg and France also at a certain moment. But this topic is much broader. And there we have to ask really, what is identity in an age of globalization? I'm a global citizen who happens to have a German passport. And I have many, many, many identities, I can tell you. I love the global environment. I'm for gender equity, and that I share with many Iranian women, And environmentalist Wangari Maathai or someone is probably more on the same wavelengths than anybody else here in Europe. So I think we should ask ourselves, what identities do we have? Where are there overlaps with people in other parts of the world? And suddenly you see that we are not that different. There is a lot that we have in common where one can reach common understanding. And therefore in the morning I said, we have to, if I want to be treated with respect, and if my freedom is to be honored, and if I want to enjoy fairness, I have to give you the same thing. And that is for me cultural diplomacy. Not soft, not power, but fairness in the first place.
I may say many thanks to you because you returned us to the real content of our discussion, because on the others we can make a lot of remarks concerning the Netherlands. I think the no was created by Pim Fortuyn, what happened to him and all the other consequences, nothing to do with the constitution. By the way, one of the main mistakes of beloved Giscard d'Estaing was to name it constitution, because it is not a constitution. I think that's one of the strong arguments against him. I think he was not serving the purpose. I think it was a kind of arrogance. I'm the creator of the constitution. But this is another subject and we should not continue. Let's go to the culture. And I think here one remark was rightly done. I think we have to deal with education. And it is not a European subject until now. Like also social policy. I'm really fed up about all the politicians saying, we need a social Europe. Where is the responsibility on the European level for social affairs? It is not existing. And all of those who are saying this are not campaigning in the parliament or by constitutional framework to gain it. And that's the same with education. I think we have a lot of differences between us. The only, I've already mentioned it, the only effort which was a success story were Erasmus, Socrates, and all these programs. But it's long time ago that they have started, and they have to be developed, and I think nobody is campaigning on the side of the nation state. To go to the contrary, I think in reality, what is a real love story for Europe? I think the variety that makes Europe really rich. I think if you are going as an Austrian 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers, I think you will be in another landscape, in another architecture, in another kind of meals, and so on and so on. That's a real richdom. And I think we are also looking to this richdom because we have here in Berlin Italian cooking and French cooking and English cooking is another question. But I think this is a real variety which is here existing, and that is a real richdom. But what is missing is the mutual understanding. I think about the kitchen we know everything, but what is the real background? So I'm always traveling to different opportunities, and I'm asking always somebody, when do you feel as a European? I'm always getting the answer if I'm outside Europe. Then we are getting the knowledge, there's something different. If I am in the States, in Asia or something, then we know a little bit of the content of Europe. And I think here has to be something done. I'm always campaigning for Jacques Delors because he said the nice sentence, you can't love a common market, we need to give Europe a soul. That's one of the main sentences. But on this, to give Europe a soul, we are not really working. Maybe we are doing it here in these days, you are here together, but I think it is not too much expressed by politics. Yeah, but even the conditions, I think, to gain knowledge about Europe are limited. I think I'm campaigning at every possibility for another visa regime for the Balkans. I think now it is not so free as it is promoted for 3 countries on the Balkans. What is the matter with the other 3 countries? Huh? I want to take the contrary. I think, for example, you have impressive music festivals. In Novi Sad, the Exit Festival is a huge European event by music. I think where you can get an extreme knowledge. But I think it is extremely difficult to get a visa, I think, to move and so on and so on. The argument of my beloved ministers of interior is always we have to fight criminality. I think if you want to be a successful criminal, you are getting always a visa. That's not a problem. I think we have enough affairs on this subject. I think here we have to move on this because on a certain level, I'm choosing again music, we have a real European programs. Look to the concert houses, operas, and so on and so on. There is no distinction nation-wise. We know we have a common heritage, and I think this is shown here, and we are following this. I think it is also in literature. That's for sure more in common. But what we have to do, I think, to convince the politicians, to convince the education, and to convince the teaching, and to convince the medias, I think also to follow on this. I think there's one tendency in the European media is to be more nationalistic or to be against the other. I think if you're campaigning against the other, you have sometimes a really success. They are those who are making the mistake and so on and so on, which is horrible. And I think here we need another movement going in this direction and another public discussion quite open, naming also those tendencies who are endangering a common European feeling or the soul of Europe.
Thank you. As we discuss these issues of the other, or a soul or an identity for Europe, I think you're touching on one of the key challenges of cultural diplomacy in the sense, how do these identities get presented? How are they perceived? And how are they defined? In the sense, can we speak of a European identity? Can we speak of a South European identity? Can we speak of a German identity? And who should be the ones deciding what that is? Should it be the artists? Should it be the educators? Should it be the politicians? These are very challenging issues. I think next on the lineup is actually Dr. Krakun, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and to the leader of the discussion. I think there is a very good discussion and very good congress that we have now. I would, for the beginning, I would refer to the Reverend Eppelman's speech, because also I have a memory in living in a country that is today European Union, but before 1991 it wasn't. It was a part of the other world. But the problems with which we were facing were not the same with the problems of GDR. Actually, we were free to travel, but we could not travel because we couldn't pay the travel. The country, it was former Yugoslavia where we lived, issued the money that had no value at all. The inflation in the second part of the 80s was about between 500 and 1,000% annually. And what we did to survive was each day when we got our salary, we tried to find somebody who was ready to change it to German marks. And then when we need Yugoslav dinar, we then change that German marks to dinars, because each day you had Yugoslav dinars in your pocket, you lost. So it was a kind of life for which today I can say, well, there is a kind of nostalgia, because we were never bored. We always tried to find what to do with the money. But how that country with that rotten money finished it is also a warning for all the others. If you forget the economy, if you forget the basic human rights, then sooner or later that you may conclude in a turmoil. So the GDR citizens were more lucky than the most of the Yugoslav citizens. But one thing was in common. We lived in the countries where the governments had the idea to cheat the history, to make some different type of world which would help them to be in power for a longer time, but also to isolate people from the real life, from the mainstream of the history. And the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was also the fall of the illusions that you can live in isolation, that you can make an utopia in isolation, because an utopia, it finishes as a farce. And after Slovenian independence, just for our part of former Yugoslavia, for Slovenia, our dreams came through. We were independent. We were in democracy. Soon we started to issue good money and convertible money. It all was a change in the quality of life. But of course, how can a small country of 2 million people survive? Is it not an illusion in isolation if we do not join the European integration processes? So it was a natural step forward was then to join European Union, to do all the preparations for the European Union, and finally with the European Union we found the environment where the country can live, can prosper, and also we don't have troubles with rotten money anymore. We are in Eurozone. I hope it will survive the Greek crisis and it will remain firm. So I think that European Union, from the point of view of those countries that are joining now, is a value that need to be preserved and that need to be developed. And the problem of European Union was also it was designed for the 6 or for the 15 members, not for 27. The Lisbon Treaty was not ideal. It had I think it had many. It might have many mistakes, but the plus is that it enables Europe to work, and perhaps from the point of view of those countries who had the experience with different systems, with different circumstances, it is better to have an Europe which might not be ideal, but which functions for the sake of the people, for the goodwill of all the population, but also that gives a good, sound environment for the nations included that can survive, that can keep their national identity and go on. That is why, no matter if the comments on the Lisbon Treaty are quite acceptable, but it's better to have a ground on which Europe can function in, and perhaps in the next few years we'll be more smart. We can make a better treaty, but to keep a treaty that enables for the enlarged European Union to function as well as good as European Union functioned when there were only 6 or only 15 members. And also the problem of identity and the problem of a possible controversy between national identity and the global identity as human beings. For the human being, it's natural that as closer the problems are, more is he concerned for them. So for people is rather natural to express themselves as a member of a family, as a member of a nation, and then as a member of European Union, and then as the member of the global world. But as we have only one world, only one Europe, and only one world, and as we all depends on each other, it is the interdependence in the global world is, I think, one of the most important trends that are developing now. So we must be conscious about that the global problems are also our problems. So we cannot hide ourselves under the family or under the national identity. We must act as global beings, and here I see also the role of diplomacy, of the soft power, and of cultural diplomacy. If we want to cooperate, we must trust to each other. Any mistrust among the world population can lead to negative consequences. For instance, if one country, one important or strong country, decides for protectionism, all others will follow. But the protectionism is catastrophic for the world economy. We know very well what happened after 1929, and when the countries wanted to solve the depression, entering into protectionism, but it pulled the world always deeper and deeper into the protectionism. So this is where I see the role of also culture diplomacy to develop mutual trust, to develop a conscience that we all belong to one world, no matter that we are citizens of different countries, that the countries also coexist in different integration processes, like, for instance, European Union. But we have only one world, and we must cooperate, and we must trust each other, and it is also the only way to solve the recent economic crisis and to prevent the threat of the depression in today's world. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to the issue of protectionism and trust in a moment, but first I want to keep with the topic also Southeastern Europe. Professor Dr. Zuvali and I, we were discussing earlier today this issue of also scientific cooperation between also countries, and how that can very often serve as an impetus and very often as a strengthening factor in terms of bilateral and multilateral cooperation. So my question is directed to you, Professor Dr. Zuvali. Southeastern Europe, what are the biggest challenges to the integration of Southeastern Europe into the EU? How can this region utilize cultural diplomacy to further their campaign for EU admission? Does cultural diplomacy have the realistic potential to further the process of EU accession, or is integration purely a matter of the candidate's economic value? How would you respond?
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to address my warm thanks to ICD and personally to you, Mr. Donfried, for your kind invitation and for the generous hospitality. And before to come back to your question, I'd like to say that I became part of Albanian government for 11 years consecutively as minister. I have worked as a university professor in Agriculture University of Tirana, and I have taught there plant genetics. So, from this point of view, I would like to answer to your question, but with 2 words, because as Albanians, I would like to say that we are working in the process for EU integration. And we are working now to complete our questionnaire, and we hope that up to the end of this year, our request to be considered by the EU Commission and probably to provide to Albania the status of candidate country. And to close this part, we believe in that philosophy of EU countries, unity in diversity. For analogy between national characteristics and the process of globalization and global citizenship, let's say. And now, as Dr. Busek mentioned in his speech, Albania have been one isolated, but most isolated country between other East European countries and the poorest, let's say. Only few examples. I have been interested for a long time to have cooperation with Western countries, with universities in my field of science, mostly in plant genetics, in plant genetic resources, and some other fields related to this. But have been forbidden. I have not, and my colleagues, we have not been allowed to write directly, to be directly connected or by correspondence with our colleagues in other universities. During I think at the end of 70s and the beginning of 80s, I tried to introduce some very important seeds from the Beltsville Gene Bank in United States, but was impossible, and I not get permission. So I was obliged to ask through FAO. There was a very nice lady, Irma Bennett, responsible for plant genetic resources, and she introduced from United States to FAO and from FAO to Albania, only with seeds, with seeds. This have been the situation in that time. And I and my colleagues, we never could imagine at that time that a day we could be possible to travel freely in different countries of Europe. And what happened in 1995 with me, I was invited by my colleagues from Gattersleben Gene Bank in Saxon-Anhalt, here in Germany, for joint research. And it was first week of June of 95. Together with my wife, we have been in the last train from Magdeburg to Quedlinburg. And you can imagine, last train, few people inside. And me and my wife, in front of us, one young lady, young girl, very nice girl. And she, but you can imagine, 16 years before, I was not so much younger. And she looked to me, concentrated in my face. I was in very difficult position, what to do. One time, yes, really very honest, very honest. At the end, I will just go there. My head on left side, on right side, on the floor, to my wife, and felt myself like I was in shame, in wrong. After some minutes, this nice girl asked me, "Are you Professor Giuvelli?" really, I was shocked. I was surprised. I said, yes, I am. But are you an Albanian immigrant? She said, no, I am 100% German. I am student in Faculty of Agriculture in Halle University in 4th year. And some weeks ago, our professor for plant genetic resources showed us one, let's say, scientific movie that have been prepared from one German journalist from Köln television, excellent, Thomas Weidenbach. He has won some, produced some very good films and has won some prizes. Yeah, maybe somebody knows him. And I was one of protagonists in this, let's say, scientific movie or film, together with some German scientists and Italian scientists. But the subject was scientific cooperation between Germany and Albania. This was the story. And very, very simple. Now, to go back. In one scientific activity that was held in Bulgaria, in Santa Kiriko, one monastery former, I met for first time my colleague Professor Karl Hammer, very well-known professor in plant genetic resources throughout the world. Is well-known. I had some correspondence with him, but never met. I met him there, and since in that time we have been in close cooperation with German Gene Bank, with some other Italians, and scientists from the United States. Finally, they support Albania to establish its own gene bank, and now we have in our gene bank in Albania 20,000 accessions of crops, mainly autochthon seeds and primitive genes that are stored there. This was one of the results of our cooperation. German Institute of Gattersleben provided to us technical assistance, post-university qualification for different specialists. Italian Institute of Germplasm of Bari provided to us some support to organize international collecting missions in Albania, and USAID of United States provided to us some funds to establish a gene bank in Albania. And this was the result of just this cooperation. I don't like to mention that finally my friend from Germany, Professor Karl Hammer, married with one Albanian girl. Very good cooperation. No, it's a very nice story. To prepare projects in order to find support, financial support from international organizations, and UNDP kindly provides some support, but I think modest funds. But as some from UNDP, some from World Bank, and some from different states. So in such a way, you can accumulate enough funds in order to improve your scientific activity and scientific products. Thank you.
Just one sentence. We must not stop in having elites only interconnected. We must go to the people. And that is a very difficult question. I think elites are traveling, elites are communicating. But the people in France, France Profonde, in Germany, what do they know about Europe? And what are we offering to them to understand what is going on. I think there we have to make much more for culture, much more for education, and on a broader minded.
So, Chairman, since I have the microphone, my neighbor actually made me forget my main point when I responded. I wanted to say, when I saw the title, I was actually thinking of Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Because who came up with the term soft power and a new type of diplomacy is Joseph Nye, and now picked up by Hillary Clinton. So we should also come to this aspect of new diplomacy and soft power, because soft power now is Hillary and company includes a lot of, reaching across the table in quite different forms, cultural exchanges, trade bargains, bilateral agreements more than multilateral agreements, and but also a little bit more understanding of the US for other people's concerns. So maybe some of us can also comment on that.
Actually, just on a related note there, I think the term that actually Hillary Clinton is using most often now is also smart power, which is also the newest term from Joseph Nye, who actually came up with the concept of soft power over 20 years ago. But smart power is essentially his way of summarizing the combination between hard and soft power. And that relates to one more question that I would like to ask. It's a difficult question. And then I'd like to actually also get some questions from the audience. But first, I need to ask this question. It's one that I struggle with on an almost daily basis. If we're asking ourselves the question here, if the goal really is strengthening multilateral cooperation, if we accept that we live in an interdependent world, the difficult question is, how should governments deal with culture? Should they be promoting culture? Should they be protecting culture? France offers some interesting examples. The other countries also offer some interesting examples. We brought Mario Vargas Llosa here. It was in 2001. He was talking about culture and democracy. And the point he said, I love the opera, you love the opera, nothing against the opera. But as he looks in Germany at the way that the German opera gets funded by German citizens, taxpayers' euros, he said for him that's a problem. And he said if you were to ask every German citizen, would you like your taxpayers' euros to support the opera, it would never work. But it continues every year that the opera is supported. And it's a challenging question because, of course, most would agree if the governmental subsidies were to stop, there probably wouldn't be a German opera. So in that sense, that's the one sort of extreme. In that sense, that really, should governments be promoting or subsidizing their own culture? The other question, turning to France, should they be protecting it? As we think about quotas on the radio, as we think about the Académie Française in terms of maintaining the purity of the French languages. Let's say, maybe I'll begin with Susan George. If you could give advice, let's say, to Latvia, recently joining the European Union, should Latvia be spending money and energy protecting Latvian culture? Should they be spending money and energy promoting Latvian culture? How should they deal with culture in that sense? Is this something that should governments deal at all with it? And this is something, I don't have an answer to this question, and I think there's, each side of it presents challenges. But as we discuss protectionism, as we discuss cultural diplomacy, how would you recommend governments deal with this very sensitive topic? And then for anyone then?
Well, I don't have an answer either, but as you've all gathered, I think by now I'm here as the token lefty or something like that, so I'll try to live up to I quite understand you're African. I think, Africans have been saying that to me for 20 years at least. And every time, you're in a discussion with them, it's La France-Afrique that comes up and all of the horrors and all of the connections with the leadership, and they always say that our worst enemy is our own leadership. And so I just wanted to add that to what you said, because this does not surprise me in the least. Well, taking the example of poor Latvia, which has just lost something like 18% of its GDP in a few months, I would say yes. What can they do except really try to bring the country together by supporting their own culture and making those people feel that they belong to something, because clearly they don't belong to Europe. The European Central Bank is never going to lift a finger for them. We don't have European bonds, so nobody is going to give Latvia cheap credit. They're going to be exposed to the tender mercies of the IMF, and therefore they are going to have to cut down on everything. So if they've got a little money in the till, I would say yes, promote Latvian music, promote Latvian celebrations, be yourselves as best you can, invite other people to celebrate with you, but what else can they do? That is an extreme case. But I think it's quite normal that every country celebrate its own culture, not just by funding the opera. You know I love the opera. That was on purpose. Okay, but also subsidize if it's necessary, if it's not getting enough popular support. Jazz, I don't care what kind of music, but there's something for everyone to participate in and share. I think that's terribly important, but that's a quite superficial answer. Anybody can say that over a beer,
Thank you. Well, I think we don't need any more Eurovision song competitions. And that actually, in the end of the day, is the common denominator. So I think I'd prefer to be back. In a way, it's not saving Irish culture, and I think maybe coming from a country that doesn't have any colonial hang-ups. We're actually welcomed, I think, generally, in other countries. We always thought somebody else knew the answers, but we had what we had to offer. I would just say on it, and it goes back to education, it is the importance of self, your place in your community, your role in your civic society, what you have to be proud of. And I mentioned earlier that even if we're to save universities, it mightn't all be about money. And there are times and places we should be putting aside that and saying, what can we offer to each other? I went to Canada to look at the education system. I visited America. I didn't get as far as Australia. It was to see how did the British education system finish. The Americans did what they called the melting pot. So never too sure what it was. I said the better education wasn't in the state education system. Then I went to Canada, and they were so hung up with the mosaic that we weren't allowed. We were there for Patrick's Day, and we were even being told to be careful about wishing people a happy Paddy's Day. We actually don't say that in Ireland, but Americans say it about us. And when I came back, trying to put this together, where were we going? My grandfather was the last silk weaver of Dublin, and I actually took that as my image, that where you get a tapestry, and it is generally the same colour, and it has generally the base. It is the gold thread, or the thread that is different, is what makes that tapestry interesting. And I actually felt in coming back and getting Irish people ready, because we travel, we have a diaspora, I think probably nearly as many as the Jews have, for all sorts of different reasons, but to actually let people leave the country knowing, in a way, we were different. And actually, it was the celebration of that difference that I hope offered tolerance, because there was a curiosity about how people were doing things. So I still think of the tapestry, and I still think of, I don't want to come and be the lowest common denominator. I probably could say I don't even want to win the Eurovision Song Competition. But I do want to be very sure of myself. And I think in that helps. But I think the biggest challenge to the European Union is the difference in languages. And I think no matter what we say and what we learn, it does, for the people we are feeling we should be directing ourselves, the elite, we will manage. We've been there, we've been brought. But I think that's actually where rumour and innuendo develop, because there is a vacuum in communication. And I loved what you said about music. There are some aspects of culture that don't require us to know the passé composé, or whatever the equivalent is in Germany.
May I say, I'm happy to come from a small country, listening to those who are coming from the big countries. Here I have to confess, on culture, it's different in Austria. I think if we are looking for a new director of the State Opera, it's a public discussion, even by the taxi drivers. A lot of those who never visited the State Opera, they have an opinion who shall be the director. And it is not a discussion. It costs us a lot of money, but it's not a discussion. Nobody is for shortage. Why? Because I think culture, especially music, but also other parts, is the identity of Austria. Because if you are looking who is famous on this, where they are born, I think the majority are not born in Austria, in the actual Austria. They are born in what is now Czech Republic, they are born in Hungary, they are born in Slovenia, and whatever. And famous writers like Kafka, that's Prague literature, and so on and so on. I think it can continue here endless, and that's not really a discussion. It was a mixture existing, because Liszt Ferenc, being a famous Hungarian composer, never spoke really Hungarian. He was born in Austria, but he's a part of the Hungarian identity. And Smetana, who wrote Ma Vlast, My Home, a cyclist of 4 pieces, I think he was really not really speak a good Czech language. I think, but he is a part of the identity of the Czechs and partly also of ours. I think we have more to look to this, what is in common by culture. That's extremely important, and I think what we are really missing on this. I think there's still more in common. I'm, out of special reason, looking to the literature coming from the Balkans. I was looking, how was it going, for example, for German-speaking people. Mainly, I think partly they were written in French, also Czech authors, and so on, that they were translated, or were translated back to the original language of the writer, and so on and so on. But I think here we need to spread some knowledge, which for sure is existing. That's really cultural diplomacy. And I think, allow me to make one remark. By all enlightenment and rationality, I think Europe does not work without a little bit of emotion. I'm always, in a certain way, admiring the Americans. On a lot of fields, I'm not admiring them. But I think, by all the discussions and the conflicts they have, if Star Spangled Banner or whatever is showing up, or is a national moment, they're all standing there with the hand on the heart. And if I'm looking to the Europeans, if we are mentioning Europe, they are putting the hand on the head. And I think that has no future. I think I want to repeat again, to give Europe a soul, I think it's a question of the content. And we have to answer, what is the content of Europe? And that can be only, for sure, culture. I think if the content is all our history, Winston Churchill said about the Balkans, they have more history than they can consume. I may say that's true also for Europe. We have so much history, we are not able to consume it. So far, let's overcome it with culture, because this is a kind of specific relations. Here, I said you are a little bit happy. If Anna Netrebko is a famous opera singer, she is Russian, now she is getting the Austrian citizenship, which I think is a very good idea. And I think it's creating a certain common feeling here. It's only a symbol, it's not important for her. The taxes are as high as in Russia, or whatever, that makes no difference. But I think we need such signs here. I think Eurovision was mentioned. May I say, it is the only one political presentation which is done by Eurovision. Why? Because then they are counting the votes. And if you are looking who is voting for whom, I think it is mirroring political feelings. So my proposal for a very long time is, let's cancel the songs. We can miss them. Let's only doing the voting, because we can learn a lot out of it, which tensions are existing. That would be extremely important. May I raise a cultural question? Where is culture on the Eurovision level? Where is culture in Euronews? There's really nothing. It is a press agency in a certain way of the Europeans, but concerning the contents, nothing is happening. I was asking why. National governments are against. I think so far, don't wait for the cultural diplomacy of the national states.
Well, again, let's not stay with the elite at opera, but let's start on the bottom. Small children education. We should teach children cultural techniques, learn them singing, learn them looking at paintings, and learn them what is real cultural life at a very small age. Integrating education at a small child stage. I introduced education at 3. And there the small children came together, all nationalities. We have only one school system where all the children are going to the same school. And the small children are speaking Luxembourgish, Portuguese, whatever the language is. And they assume multilingualism quite fairly in an early age. Why don't we do it? We have introduced, so Protect from Europe. We have introduced at the European level the concept of employability in the educational system. And it's a horror, because it's a level telling people, learn German just to be able to buy stamps when you're in Germany and to ask where is the train taking you back, but not the language learning as it should be done with the whole culture, with the literature. So we should again return to the old concepts of language learning. And I think that is the basic that is to do in all the member states. Protect culture. The communists dealt quite well with culture, and they had culture as a political strategy. So nobody would want to return to this system of protecting a state-protected culture. No, that's definitely not the way. I'm against that. But what we must do better is to firm the own culture of every member state and to open to other cultures, so to have this broad-mindedness and to pay attention that culture has money enough. What is the problem of the mobility of artists? There is a lot of problems to do. The Commission knows quite well what they should do. The question of the visas. The question if you are traveling with a cello in an airplane. That's an unbelievable problem for instrumentists. There are many questions on social rights for artists. They are not solved. They are not solved. But, yeah, they should be solved by the ministers, not by the ministers for culture, but by the ministers for social affairs. But they don't attack to this mobility, and artists are among the population the most mobile in Europe and also in the neighboring states and in the incoming states. We have good models. We have the European Capital for Culture. Again, the concept shifted to this contest in the member state when next is Poland. When they are choosing the capital, they have to make a contest between so many cities, and afterwards is Spain, and which will be the city. In the former concept, the Council of Ministers was deciding for one city, and then it was it. And now it's getting a bit like the Olympics. So we have so many things to in common, but the main thing is diversity. We should all be aware of our identity as our diversity, or the reverse.
A brief remark. I'm still puzzled and even worried, because why are we always coming back to the most local, tiny issues of a European country that you can do at home? Nobody bars you from promoting education. When I heard this topic, not only came Hillary to my mind, but I thought we are discussing minarets in Switzerland or the link between Europe and Islam. These are issues of cultural diplomacy. You can have your opera, promote it, have it. But do you also like Chinese music, and how do you relate to Chinese music? These are, when we talk about diplomacy, this is how do we relate to each other? Are we prepared to have Chinese immigrate into Luxembourg en masse? Oh, yes. Yeah? Good. Okay. But just to remind ourselves that there is a broad canvas of issues which we have barely touched upon.
But if you are doing it without European competence, you cannot settle the problem. I think here I may say to you as a German, the Germans are the biggest problem, because culture and science and education is on the federal level and not on the national level. I think it's even difficult to make comparison between Hesse and Bavaria.
Thank you. John F. Kennedy once said that we need to make the world safe not only for democracy, but also safe for diversity. And I think as we reflect on these issues, that seems to be also a huge opportunity for cultural diplomacy. As we ask questions such as European identity or also global interdependence, it seems as if the biggest challenge that I would see for cultural diplomacy isn't how can we just promote or persuade, that our culture is great or this and that. The great opportunity that I've been observing, how can we make it easier to access? In the sense, how can we make it easier for, let's say, Chinese to access European culture? And also the other way around. And I think there, in terms of this cultural diplomacy based on facilitating or allowing access, as opposed to promoting, as the America House in Berlin, for example, used to have a plaque on the front that said, to tell America's story to the world. It doesn't really, I don't think that's the need these days. I think it's more about listening than it is telling. So I just wanted to mention that idea there, in the sense, how can we create an environment in which this diversity can take place and in which we also have opportunities to learn and to access each other's cultures, to also then enable perhaps something greater in terms of a regional culture. I think you were next in line.
Well, I must apologize myself that I'm sometimes mixing culture with economics, but as I'm professor of economics, I cannot go around economics as well, and I can also speak about culture in some terms of economics. So I was recently involved in some analysis of price comparison, where we analyzed the prices in Slovenia with the prices in more developed countries of the European Union. And the results were that the prices in Slovenia are slightly lower in general than the prices in Germany, Austria, or Italy. In general, the prices in Slovenia are about 20% lower. And there are not many items that could be in Slovenia more expensive than in Austria or Germany or Italy. But there is one significant segment of goods which is in Slovenia more expensive: newspapers and books. It's also quite obvious why. Slovenia has 2 million population. If you want to prepare a book or a newspaper for 2 million population reading this language, the fixed costs are higher than if you prepare it for 40 million population. That is economic reality. And if we want to read Slovenian books and Slovenian newspapers, we must pay it. And of course, we like to pay for that, because it's to read, to develop books, literature, and other forms of culture in Slovenian language. It is a part of our identity which we respect very much. And of course, we are aware of the fact, if you are a population of 2 million, you have your own language, your own culture in some respect. You must protect it. But as an economist, of course, I am against protectionism. So, but if you protect your culture, it is not protectionism. It is not the same if you support the culture creativity, or if you forbid import of some goods. These are two very different things, because in economy, mostly you protect against. If you protect your culture, you protect for. In economy, if you protect, you close against the other. In culture, if you protect, you open yourself, because you also make circumstances when you can exchange your culture with the other culture, when you may cooperate with the other, when you can promote also the translations from your language into other languages, and from other languages into your languages, which is also culture, but this is not the protection in economic point of view. It is promoting culture, which of course is costly, and people, again, I use economic terms, consuming some culture, some products in the culture must pay more, or even taxpayers must decide that a significantly higher proportion of budget goes for the culture in small country than in a big country. But it is also the way how to maintain the differences, how to maintain your position of your language, of your culture in the world and in the global scene. So to promote culture is not protectionism.
I'd like to ask a question first and then say something. Can one of these brilliant young people in the audience tell me how many European countries actually have a Ministry of Culture? Because to me that seems quite normal, and it seems quite normal to me that we have a law in France that the price of a book can never be more than 5% less than where it's sold anyplace else, because we don't want chains wiping out all the small booksellers in the neighborhoods and so on. So that seems to me absolutely normal, but I think I'm perhaps not on the same wavelength. I'd really like to know who's got a Ministry of Culture and who hasn't. What I wanted to say was that I've just come back from Brazil, where we were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the World Social Forums, which at the beginning were started in order to do something in a different way from Davos and have an anti-Davos. And now everybody's sort of forgotten about Davos, although it's still at the same time. But that has been an incredible melting pot. This one was quite low-key, and it was mostly Brazilians and some other Latin Americans and a few foreigners, but not very many, or non-Latin Americans. But usually it is an enormous event of sharing and of developing common values. And I think that's been one of the most extraordinary experiences of of globalization, because many people feel that globalization has been a kind of juggernaut smashing their culture and making everyone exactly the same, and everyone has to be neoliberal and privatize and regulate and let the banks do whatever they want and so on. But at the World Social Forum, we are developing a common core of values which are exactly the opposite to those values, and which are, I would say, pretty much operational now. I know many networks that have come out of that social forum. There's one on trade, there is one on gender, there is one on, there's any number of subjects that are discussed each time, and where people have said, yeah, that's a problem in my country, and let's get together and let's, have a network about it. So there's a whole network between Europeans, for instance, who are against the EPAs, against the economic partnership arrangements that the European Trade Commissioner and the Commission are forcing upon African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, along with the people from those countries. And that has been very fruitful. So I just wanted to say that is beginning to exist. The next social forum will be in Dakar in January 2011. But there's now been one in New Delhi, there's been one in Nairobi, and this has given rise to all kinds of forums all over the world, so that actually there have been more in Africa than any other place, usually with 4, 5, 6 African citizens of 4, 5, 6 African countries participating. But this is something which is really helping civil society to come together and then actually campaign for change afterwards in a more effective way in a globalized world.
Thank you very much. Well, during this panel discussion, I think I posed 3 questions. I had initially prepared 6 questions, and in the course of the discussion, I have at least 20 that I would love to ask. However, unfortunately, I'm looking at the watch here, and it's 8:40 p.m. We've had a very intensive day for all of us. I know some of the speakers need to actually leave also. So unfortunately, I will reserve the questions that I have, and I would suggest in terms of questions from the audience, etc., let's do that in a more informal way after the session in terms of dinner, wine, etc. So in that sense, I think we really do need to bring this to an end, but I found it very thought-provoking. I have more questions than answers at the end, which I guess is also good. And I'm looking forward to the next 4 days to explore some of these issues in greater depth. So if I could please ask everyone to help join in a very big thank you to the panelists. Thank you.